Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I'm joined by Charles Feltman. Charles has spent 25 years as an executive and leadership coach supporting individuals, teams, and entire organizations in becoming exceptional at building and maintaining strong trust in service to their success. Charles is the author of The Thin Book of Trust, an essential primer for building trust at work, now in its third edition. And that's really what we dive into. We dive deep into his book on trust, the different elements that make up trust. And as you will hear in this, I've actually used those methods successfully in a few conversations that I had been struggling with people in my life. It's really, I think, a great insightful way to think about trust and have really productive conversations with people around how you feel about your relationship, especially when you feel like you've been slighted or you feel like somebody is not earning your trust, or when you feel like maybe you've betrayed somebody else's trust and you're having to have a conversation with them on how to rebuild it. So trust is so important in all of our relationships at work and at home that I was really excited to bring Charles on and have this conversation today. Whether you're a leader or not, I think there's something in here for you. Here is Charles Feltman. Charles, welcome to the show. Excited to have you on and talk about trust today, which in about almost 200 episodes of this show, we've not done one dedicated specifically to trust, but it is such a huge element of being a human being and interacting with human beings. So excited to have you on today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm interested and looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have. And that is interesting about trust is a fundamental aspect of every relationship we have, trust or distrust to some degree. So it's interesting that you're just now getting around to talking about trust on your podcast, but let's do it.
Better late than never, right? So let's talk about first just what is trust. How do you define trust?
So in the book that I wrote, the Thin Book of Trust, the definition that I use is trust or trusting is being willing to risk or risking making something you value vulnerable to someone else's actions. So the simple way to think about that is there's something you value. Maybe it's some confidence that you share with someone else. So you're making that vulnerable to their actions. Now, if they uphold your trust, they will keep it in confidence. If they actually go and tell someone else, then they've betrayed your trust. Their actions have caused damage to your trust in them.
Okay.
So basically, it's being willing or choosing to risk making something you value vulnerable to another person's actions, whatever those might be.
Would that count as just your expectations or your time too?
I was just going to think about it in the workplace. There's so many things that we entrust other people with or not because they are of value to us and we are concerned about the risk, or we think we can risk, that it's safe to risk, making whatever that is vulnerable. And like you said, your time is valuable to you, your ideas, your ways of doing things, all kinds of things that we potentially can make vulnerable to others.
Yeah. And can you break down the 4 components that go into trust? And this, when I read the book, this was like a glass shattering moment for me. Like this just created so much clarity around what trust is and how to think about it. I'll just tell this story really quick at the beginning here, which is I had a conversation with somebody very close to me a couple of years ago. And I was trying to express some frustrations that I had with the person. And I said, the only way I can describe it is I don't trust you. And it was really hard to say because in a lot of ways I did trust this person, but it was the only way I could explain the feeling that I was feeling. And it didn't feel completely accurate. And I'm still very close to this person, and it's kind of been something that's lingered between our relationship. And reading these 4 elements of trust just solve the problem right away. And it was great. So if you could just share what those are, I would appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me just preface that a little bit by saying that these 4, what I call them assessment domains. So going back to that idea of choosing to risk making something we value vulnerable. So we're making a risk assessment when we choose to trust someone. And so the assessment that we're making is this person worthy of my trust? And rather than having that be one sort of binary on off switch, which so often happens, and it sounds like kind of you got stuck there.
Yeah.
Rather than thinking about it as just either I trust them fully or I don't trust them at all, what I'm saying here with these 4 assessment domains is that there are 4 different areas in which we can assess someone's trustworthiness. And we might find that we trust them in 3 of those 4 domains quite well, but there might be one domain that we're struggling with.
Mm-hmm.
So the 4 domains that I talk about in the book and that I use with my clients all the time is one is care, is the assessment that I can trust that you have my interests in mind as well as your own when you make decisions and take action, that you have my back, that you intend good for me. So it's this fundamental trust in, and if I can trust you in that way, I feel safe to be around you. I feel safe to share things with you. I feel safe to be vulnerable with you in some very important ways. So it's this domain of care. The second domain that I talk about, or one of the other 4, is sincerity, which is really kind of a combination of honesty and integrity. That is to say, I trust that I can believe what you say, what you tell me, that you've thought about it, you've looked at the evidence, and when you say something, I can believe it. I can take that for truth, at least as far as you understand it to be. And also that you act with integrity, which means that you walk your talk, that if you say something, you're going to follow that up with actions that match. So that's the domain of sincerity. And you can see that if I believe that I can trust you care about me, I also believe that you're sincere when you tell me that that you have my interests in mind.
Yeah.
Those 2 are very closely linked in that respect. A third domain is reliability, which has to do with keeping the specific commitments or promises that you make to other people. So if I say, oh, Brian, I'm going to be on this podcast, I'm going to be online with you at whatever time it is, 11 o'clock, and I'm going to be ready to go for the podcast. That means that I will be. I'm making that commitment to you and that I follow through with it. If I don't, then I become less trustworthy in your eyes in the domain of reliability.
Mm.
And finally, the 4th domain is competence, which in many ways has a lot to do with standards. What's my standard of competence? What's your standard of competence? So having shared standards of competence is really helps with this domain. But what essentially it's saying is that I trust that you have the knowledge, experience, expertise, background, resources to do what you say you are going to do or that I'm asking you to do. But kind of along with that comes, if you don't, part of that trust is that you'll tell me that you're not going to, pull a fake it till you make it. Or if you do, you're willing to, deal with the consequences if you don't. And it's a problem for all of us. But basically, it's trust that you have the wherewithal to do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, so many of these are interrelated. Care and sincerity, sincerity and reliability, reliability and competence. They all sort of overlap to some degree, but it, it is helpful for me. I've found it helpful since I read your book a few weeks ago to think about trust like this in different relationships that I have. And so the example that I mentioned before with this person that I'm close to, I know that they care about me. I know that. I don't doubt that at all. I know that they're sincere and I know that they're competent. I know they're capable, but the issue has been reliability. Some things that they have said they've not executed on. And it's not because they don't want to, it's just a lack of reliability. And it was when I was able to pinpoint that, I actually went back to the person and said, "Hey, remember that conversation?" And they said, "Oh, yeah, I remember that conversation." And I said, "It wasn't trust in a broad brush, it was reliability." And the person said, "Okay, I can see that." And it was great because we were able to work through that again a few years later after the initial conversation and the initial sting. And I think about other people, there's we all know people who really care for us and they're really sincere, but they're just not competent. They just can't do what they are claiming that they can do. Or vice versa, somebody who says what they mean, we believe what they say, they do what they say, they're competent, but they don't care about us. Like there's plenty of those people out there too. And that, you can pinpoint as a lack of trust too. So I just thought, I'm belaboring the point now, but I just thought it was great to be able to keep those four things in our heads when we think about issues we're having with other people when it comes to trust, just because trust can be so nebulous. It's one of those things that it's like, it's hard to define. It's like, was it the Supreme Court definition of obscenity was they even said like, you can't define it. You just know it when you see it. It's kind of
Yeah.
like trust. You just know it when you feel it or when you don't.
Well, and that's the whole point of having these four assessment domains to kind of think about is that, in fact, you can use those to really go from this kind of nebulous feeling down to what are the behaviors that I'm concerned about? What is it that this person's actually doing that has left me with this sense that I can't really trust them?
Yeah.
Or another way to put it is that what's valuable to me is not necessarily safe with this person in this situation.
Yeah. So because this is a great self assessment too, right? If you're assessing your relationships with your spouse, your friends, your teammates at work, the direct reports you have, this is a great self assessment as well. I'd like to break down some of these components and have some questions under each domain if that works for you.
Absolutely. Yes. Sounds great.
So let's start with care. What is the right amount of care for the workplace? Because care is one that could feel kind of woo woo real quick. And, oh, I need to know that my boss loves me and wants the world for me. And like, it doesn't seem like it's quite right. So, how do we define care when we think about workplace relationships or any relationship?
So I will give you an example from somewhat long time ago coaching client that I had, just because I don't want to out anybody that I'm currently working with. But he was saying that speaking of bosses, he was having real challenge with his boss, that he didn't trust his boss. And so I said, let's take a look at it, break it down, look at it in these four domains. And basically what it came to was that he was concerned that his boss really didn't have his interests in mind. That when the boss, first of all, boss would constantly say, miss meetings. Okay, here we go. Well, here's our monthly get together. And then, oops, can't make it.
Yeah.
Can't, and then if there was a meeting, it would typically supposed to be an hour, and the boss would say, "Oh, you know what? I'm sorry, I have to go." After the boss got her points across, right? But my client didn't get to talk about what was of concern to him. So you can kind of see there's two things here. There's one was sincerity. Was this boss really sincere about actually keeping meetings and whatever, and also care. But this person really doesn't care about what's going on with me, what I need to do with my work, etc. So very specific behaviors that he was able to identify. And I think that's kind of the point of one of the main points of this is that you can get to that place. So then we had the conversation about, well, can you talk to your boss about this? Because of course, the first thing was, can you talk about not trusting your boss? Oh no, I could never go to my boss and say I don't trust her. That's like suicide. And so, okay, so what about this then? Can you go and have a conversation with her about this? And he was able to like do that. It was he had the presence and
so instead of saying I don't trust you, he was able to say I don't get the sense that you have my best interest in mind.
Yeah. That you've kind of left me to sink or swim here, and that So he did actually have the conversation. It turned out, surprise to him, that well, first of all, she copped to it, said, yeah, and the thing is, I feel like you've got it handled. So I don't need to, there's so many fires that I'm having to put out in other places that I could really just let you go on your own recognizance and you'll be fine. So that was a surprise to him.
Yeah.
But what was even more important was that they were able to talk through and come to some kind of arrangement about how he could actually get some of her time. She would actually commit, may not be an hour a month, but it was something that he could. So,
well, it's funny, that disconnect in and of itself is funny, right? Because his lack of trust in her stemmed from her full trust in him.
Right. Interesting, isn't it? But see, that's the point, is that we see other people. So trust is in the eye of the beholder, right? Or trustworthiness, right? So I'm going to assess other people's trustworthiness through my filters, through my experience, through how I've come to understand the world. And so they're doing whatever they're doing, and I'm laying my filters over that. And I may come up with that assessment, I can't trust him or her.
Yeah.
But in fact, it may be in fact the case that that person really isn't trustworthy in that domain.
Yeah.
That sometimes is the case. It's often is the case as well.
Yeah. Well, it's just good if you're a leader to think about this concept, because like I can think about right off the top of my head a number of team members that I work with who I have complete trust in, and often I will leave them to their own devices. That doesn't necessarily mean that they trust me, and it doesn't mean that me leaving them alone is what they want. So that's where, I mean, one of the things I believe and have believed for a long time, and it's only been reinforced with this podcast, is so much of the success of individual relationships or group relationships and group performance is ongoing open communication all the time. It's just like you have to keep talking with the people on your team, whether that's at home or at work. And this concept that like if you are not checking in on a somewhat regular basis, things can be drifting apart. And just because you feel like it's great doesn't mean that they feel like it's great. So it's just a good reminder. You can get way bogged down by that and be like, oh my God, I got to do this all the time. But I think you got to avoid getting totally bogged down, but just use it as a reminder. Hey, every once in a while, check in on this stuff.
Yes. So trust is not something that we tend to talk about much, but I found that when people do talk about it, not, like get so far into it that that's all we talk about, but check in on it every once in a while. How are we doing? How am I doing? Are there things that I'm doing that are causing you to be concerned with regard to trusting me? What are those things? And with a team, sitting down with your team periodically and saying, okay, what are the things that, what are the behaviors and actions that can get in the way of strong trust in this team? And how can we avoid them? Um,
Yeah.
how can we do the things that do build it? Trust has long, in fact, years ago when I first wrote when I was writing the book, in fact, on LinkedIn, I did a poll in two different groups, an HR group and an OD group. And it was a simple poll. I just asked people, do you think trust is more of a behavioral issue or a character issue? And it was about 40% character, 40% behavior, and
Hmm.
20% both.
Interesting.
So one of the things that people have struggled with is if they think it's the trust, or if I say I don't trust you, what I'm really saying is I think that there's something wrong with your character.
Mm.
It's really uncomfortable to go say that to somebody. Or vice versa, if you come to me and say I don't trust you, are you telling me that my character is flawed? Right away, I'm going to defend myself against that.
Yeah. Well, and human beings just have the propensity to take any one deficit in themselves and extrapolate it to their whole self-worth, right? Everybody knows somebody where you give them one piece of feedback and their whole identity unravels. They blow up, they melt down. It's, oh, I guess I'm a bad person. I can't get anything right. And it's like, no, 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 that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, like, can you close the door when you're done in the bathroom? Like, that's all I'm asking you here. So, it's like, we've all seen people who have that reaction, and it is hard for some people to take any form of criticism. But I think that's where, if you can focus it on the behaviors, especially if it falls into the competence, reliability, or sincerity, like, are you doing the things you say you're going to do? Are you doing them to the standard that we agree that they need to be done? Those are behaviors. Those are objective more than, hey, I don't trust your character.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about sincerity then. And you kind of touched on it a little bit in your explanation, but I think it'd be fun to go a little bit deeper. In the book, you talk about internal congruence and the importance of internal congruence to building trust with other people, and being sincere in what you say outside of yourself. Can you talk about what internal congruence is and why that's so important?
Yeah. That's really the starting place, I think, of trustworthiness is to be clear internally. How would I put this? A different way to put this is not lying to myself, to being honest with myself about what I'm thinking, what my motivations are, what I really do care about, what my values are, and living my values rather than just talking about them.
Yeah. Not your aspirational values, but like how you actually show up in the world.
Exactly. Well, I
Yeah.
think both are important. I mean, having an
Sure.
aspirational value is important too, and but being honest with myself about, oh, I'm aspiring to that that value
Yes.
and the actions that go with that. So yes, and so that internal congruence of being really honest with myself. And there are times when we all fall into the trap of really wanting to be a certain way or look a certain way or whatever, and we just don't measure up, and yet we don't want to look at that. And those are the tough moments when we really need to stop and go, wait a minute, that is how that I did that, or those are the things that's something I've been doing, or
Yeah.
and I need to either recognize that I either need to live into that, or I need to stop doing that and do
Yeah.
whatever I need to do to change how I approach the world so that I can stop doing that. So internal congruence is really effectively not lying to ourselves.
Yeah. Which goes back to what we were talking about before about people who have a hard time taking feedback. Like, internal congruence hinges on our ability to look at ourselves with an objective lens and say, where can I get better? Where am I living my values? Where am I not living my values? does this person who's coming at me actually have a leg to stand on? And am I at fault here? To be able to process those kinds of thoughts and emotions really is the essence, or at least the foundation of internal congruence. And then it allows you to build sincerity with other people, because even if nobody knows that you've done all that work, like, you can feel it when you're talking to somebody who has done work on themselves and is confident in who they are and how they show up.
Absolutely. As you were talking about that, there was something else that was coming up. Oh, yes. So this may be a big digression that you might want to edit out. I don't know.
I love digressions. Go ahead.
I don't know if you're familiar with adult development theory.
Not enough to say anything meaningful on this podcast.
Okay.
No.
That's actually probably me too. So we're both talking, but according to most of the theories out there, there's stages of development, right? We don't just stop developing when we turn 20 or 21. That's it. We actually continue to develop cognitively, emotionally, morally, and so on as we get older. And so one of the stages of development that has been identified by a number of different researchers, Robert Keegan is probably the foremost of those, talks about how our locus of reference is outside of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking to other people to sort of give us credence, who we are, what we do.
Validate who we are, direct who we are. Yeah.
We look to other people to validate us. And that's a stage that most people go through between their 20s and sometimes even into their early 30s and mid 30s. And in that stage, that's exactly what we're doing. You were talking about that. We're looking to other people to validate us. And so it's a lot harder to develop that internal congruence,
mm-hmm.
because really it's out there. It's those people out there that determine what kind of person I am, not me. Once you get done with that stage and move into the next stage, that's a stage where, well, wait a minute, no, it is me.
So what advice do you have for people who are younger and want to build a sense of internal congruence? Like, what are the types of questions they should be asking themselves, or what should they be thinking about?
That is well, first of all, that's a really big question. And there are people out there who have studied this and know a heck of a lot more about this than I do. But I would say that, first of all, just really continually asking, well, whose decision is this? What's important to me? What is my value here? What am I doing to uphold my values here? And when it comes to trust is sort of making the decision initially, the intention to be trustworthy, for example. I intend to be worthy of other people's trust. And then from there, moving into the paying attention to the behaviors that I know are important, that other people will be making those assessments on. But it's my choice to do that rather than I'm just at the whim of those other people's assessments.
Yeah. The other piece of sincerity that I thought was really interesting was a story that you told in the book about somebody who was a boss. I think you were working with the boss, and there were some issues on the team and there was a lack of trust, and it came out that they were being insincere, or the diagnostic category was sincerity, where they were lacking. And the person said, well, I care about my team and I'm pretty reliable, but the lesson in there was that they were not willing to face harsh realities. There were things going on in their team that they were not addressing, and that actually created a lack of sincerity, or a perceived lack of sincerity. Can you talk to that? Because I would not have pegged that to sincerity, but reading the book, it made a lot of sense.
Yeah. I think what you're talking about is a situation where I was coaching someone who was head of a team, head of an agency, actually. And she had taken over in a difficult situation. And she was trying to clean up a bit of a mess left by her predecessor. And she was doing a pretty darn good job of it for the most part. But there was one person on the team who was hired by the predecessor who was struggling. It was causing all kinds of repercussions for the other team members. As I, I did talk to them because I did kind of a interview 360 and got that they were concerned that she had not confronted this individual and actually fired this individual because the individual was not competent. The individual was unable to do the work that the team needed him to do. And she had all kind of good reasons, right, in her mind for not doing that. But in the end, she realized that they didn't think that she was sincere with them about making things right, really building the team fully, building it out with the right people in the right places doing the work.
Because she couldn't deal with the harsh reality that this person was an underperformer. And even though it was going to be hard for her to let him go, her not being willing to let him go showed that she wasn't really sincere about the outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. And really, and this happens a lot, where especially with new leaders who are trying to figure this out, but it's he's a good person, he's struggling, he's or she or whatever, placing more value on being supportive of the person than on being supportive of the team and what the team really needs. And that's a really tough choice to make at some point. How do you decide somewhere along the line, no, this person needs to go in order to really make the team work?
Yeah. Yeah, those are harsh choices. But I think it's good to have the reminder that if we are not facing those harsh realities or not making those tough decisions, that's a choice too, and that has repercussions and it could erode the trust of the people looking at us. Because I think it's easy to think, well, they're not seeing this, they don't have any purview into here, but like everybody on the team knows, people talk, and everybody is forming opinions all the time. And so, if you don't think they know what's going on, they definitely do.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the things that leaders often are unaware of is just how much the people who work for them are actually observing in micro detail what they're doing, their behaviors and actions, trying to predict the future.
Yeah.
And what they're going to do.
I have to remind myself of that at home. I have 2 young boys and, they see everything that I do. So, I'll be talking with my wife in the front seat of the car and they'll chime in with a question in the back and you're like, oh, geez, you guys are paying attention.
Yep.
Let's move on to reliability. Reliability, we all want to be reliable. We all want to do what we say we're going to do. And yet there's a couple dynamics at play here. Like one is the world is just moving faster than it's ever moved. It's asking more of us than it's ever asked before. We have so many different commitments in all the different aspects of our lives, and there's so much noise pulling on our attention. How are you coaching your clients to keep better commitments in this just explosion of attention culture?
So one of the things that happens very often is that people make commitments to each other when they really don't have enough information to be making the commitment in the first place. So, so-and-so comes and asks, my boss comes and asks me to do X, Y, Z. Doesn't really give me all the details, enough details for me to understand what it's really going to take for me to do it. But I say yes because it's my boss, or I say yes because it's one of my teammates, or I say yes because it's, somebody else over here that I'm, I don't want to look like I'm not a team player. So I say yes. And then I start doing it and it turns out it's taking longer than I thought it would. And therefore I'm falling behind. And then I've got about 40 or 50 other similar commitments. So part of it is really making sure before you say yes to a request from someone else to do something, that you understand what specifically they're asking for and by when they expect it and all the expectations they have around that. And also being willing to negotiate that if you don't really think you can. That's another place where people get stuck. They think that their only possibilities are yes or no, and no's not possible. So I have to say yes.
Tell me more about
Uh,
that. What are some strategies that people could put in place to do that kind of negotiation in a way that doesn't burn trust or their job?
yeah, right. Well, first of all, I think it's important to kind of really understand where your priorities are, what your priorities are. So if my boss comes and says, "Hey, here's a top priority thing I need you to be doing," that's going to move up to the top of the list, and other people and other commitments may have to shift downwards, which may require going back to the person and renegotiating something in terms of due date or what I'm going to do. What I really try to work with teams and groups of leaders on around this is recognizing that there's so much stuff to be done, and that simply overloading people with things to do and having them fail to be reliable damages trust. It damages the organization as a whole. Trust degrades on the team, trust degrades among people in the organization. It's much better to have a few things delayed than to have people constantly failing
Yeah.
to come through. So part of it's that. Another great strategy too, when somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, can you do X?" is to say, I need to check on a few things. I need to check and see if I have access to this information, or that these people will be able to do part of this that I need them to be able to do. I'll get back to you, at 4 o'clock this afternoon and let you know if I can do it as you're asking or if we have to negotiate something different. But remembering that we can negotiate something different in probably 90% of the requests that we get.
Yeah, that stall tactic is one of my favorites. I helped lead a session for our teams on setting boundaries, and that was one of the things we talked about is often people feel pressure in the moment to say yes or no, and that, hey, let me look at my priority list, let me talk to my boss, let me talk to my team members, let me like there's so many ways you can stall. And maybe you can't say no, so maybe you're not stalling to give them a yes or no, but maybe you're stalling to set the deadline for when it's due. Hey, yes, absolutely can do that. I'm just not sure I can get it done by the date you're talking about. Let me just look through my calendar over the next hour and think about this, and I'll see how I can rearrange some stuff, and then I'll get back to you on when I can finish this. Like that, it just gives you time. If nothing else, it just gives you time to take a breath, think about it
Yeah.
critically, so you're not in this heightened emotional state, and then give a real answer. So that's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
For
And
sure.
the real answer thing too is important, that so the different answers or responses you can give to a request are yes, I'll do exactly what you're asking me to do, which means you better understand exactly what it is so that you can plan the time for it and so on. No, which is I'm not going to do it at all. So you now need to go find somebody else to do this. But there's also a counteroffer, which is, yeah, I can do this much of it by the date you're asking. Or if we push the date out, I can do the whole thing. Or, I can do these parts of it, but I don't have the expertise to do that part of it. Whatever it is, there's a counteroffer there, which leads to a negotiation, which ultimately would lead to a commitment that is something that you can keep.
Yeah.
And then there's the stall act, the commit, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and if anybody wants a good resource on how to do this better, there's a great book out there called Essentialism, which is all about doing less better. And it's really all about how to prioritize and set boundaries. So if anybody's interested in that. And then I haven't done an episode on trust. I did do one on clarity. and the importance of clarity and gaining clarity. And that was with Anne Latham. If anybody wants to look that up, we'll put that in the show notes as well, because she is the self-proclaimed queen of clarity. And she is an evangelist for the importance of getting very, very clear when communicating with other people. As you talk about in your book, you talk about drive-by requests and how often we will just kind of throw something out to somebody to say like, hey, I need you to get this done. And you have no idea what it is you actually want. And there's no way that the person you're asking, are going to have any idea what they actually want. Nor does, oh yeah, sure, mean that they're actually going to get it done on the timeline or to the standards that you're thinking of in your head. So clarity is key.
Yeah. And email is a real problem with that too, because I send you an email with my request, and I assume then that you're just going to go do it.
That you're going to do
and
it. Yeah.
I don't wait for you to get back to me and say, you know what, I can't, or this is what I can do, or whatever it is. I just make that assumption, and then when you don't, I lose trust in you.
Yeah.
Something wrong with that.
Well, that's the other thing, is it's really easy to say yes in an email and then not be reliable and follow through. That happens a lot too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And then you've no method of capturing the things you've committed to in your email inbox. And so then things fall through the cracks. So yeah, you do have to be very careful with email. Let's talk about competence, just to round this out a little bit. You talked about demonstrating competence to build trust in your teams. And it's important for a leader to have competence. But we've also talked ad nauseum, just as a culture, right, about the importance of being able to fail. And so I just was curious how you balance these two things out, especially for leaders where they want to demonstrate competence, but in order to grow, they're going to need to push themselves. And that means that they're likely going to fail from time to time and not demonstrate that competence. So how can leaders or just individuals in general think about this concept?
Yeah, that's a great question. So competence says, if I trust your competence, like I said, I'm trusting that you have the experience, expertise, knowledge, whatever, to do what you say you're going to do, or that I'm asking you to do. And so if I just, I just make that assumption, okay, you can do that, and you go off and do it, that's all is well. I continue to trust your competence. If you go off and do it and it doesn't quite work, but you come back to me and say, look, I did this and I thought I had it, but I didn't. I need to learn some new things or whatever, or here's what I learned in the process. That also is going to actually build trust with other people. Most of the time, it's going to build trust with folks. Or if you say, look, I've never tried this before. I don't think anybody's tried this before. Certainly, I haven't tried it before. I'm willing to try. Do you trust me to try and to do my best at it?
Yeah, and we're going to be okay if we don't succeed.
Yeah,
you're not going to be thrown under the bus.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So leaders who support that, who tell people, look, I want you to try, and if you fail, I want you to learn something from it, and I want us all to learn something from it, because you're 100% right. That's how we learn. We don't learn by doing it right.
Yeah,
we learn by doing it wrong, and then taking a look at it and saying, okay, how can we fix this?
So, all right. So we'll use your methodology here. So it's great to be competent, but if we do something and we fail, we can still reinforce the fact that we're going to care for our team or the other individual through that failure, and that we're sincere in our effort in trying, in our effort to get better from the failure. So we can, and we can put reliable processes in place so that, hey, we did what we said we were going to do. It just didn't work. You can reinforce a failure with the first three and sort of repair any damage that would be done from a lack of competence.
Yes. I also think that it's important for teams and managers with their direct reports and basically everybody else to have conversation about what are our standards of competence. Is our standard of competence no failure? That's a problem.
Mm, that's a great point.
So, you know, part of having that conversation is that people understand, okay, it's okay to fail, or maybe in this case, it's not okay to fail when you're sending a group of astronauts up to the International Space Station.
Yeah.
We don't fail, but we try a whole lot of things along the way to find out where we might, where failure could happen, so that we can avoid it.
Yeah. I love that concept, because I've had that conversation on here a bunch. Is like, we know failure is important, but we also know there are times when we can't fail. And so I think in any endeavor, it's important to figure out where can you fail so that you can get the outcome you want. Because that Mars mission, or launching an astronaut into space, you're going to fail a million times in testing, right? In the experiments you run, as you're iterating what this all looks like and how it works, you can fail there a ton of different times, so that you don't fail when you strap a man to the chair and jam a rocket in his rear end and send him into space, right? So
Right.
like, there are plenty of places in any endeavor where you can fail. Like, I've talked about this with military special operations veterans, where they fail all the time. They train and train and train, and they fail all the time, so that their failure in the field, when lives are really on the line, is minimal. And so I just think that's a good thing to remember, that if we're in an environment where it feels like we can't fail at all, there are actually we can build in opportunities to fail and try in a safe sort of practice environment.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
So, Charles, last question I have for you is, what happens when we do damage to trust? How do we repair? What does that look like when we realize that we have harmed somebody, or broken their trust in some way, betrayed their trust in some way? What do we do to get back that trust?
I think the basic is, acknowledge the harm, acknowledge what we did, specifically what we did, not just generally, oh yeah, I screwed up, I'm sorry, but really specifically, I did. I recognize I did this, and I understand how that damaged your trust and how that harmed you, whatever happened here, and apologize for it. Say, I regret doing that. I'm sorry that I did that. I will do everything I can to make sure that I don't do that again. And also sometimes it's just, so, what is there something that I can do to make this better for you?
Yeah. It's funny. I'm smiling because, as I mentioned, I have two young boys, and we've watched a lot of Daniel Tiger, which is a spinoff from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
Hmm.
And so it's about the character. One of the characters was the tiger in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. They built a whole cartoon around Daniel Tiger. They have all these catchy jingles, and one of them is about, if you do something wrong, or if you do something that somebody else doesn't like, ask how you can help. First say sorry, and then ask, how can I help? And so it's funny because we talk about that with our boys all the time when they hurt their brother or do something, and, well, hey, go ask how you can help. And so it's funny, lo and behold, that
Hmm.
works for adults too.
Yes, those shows aren't just for kids.
No, they're for, we like to think that they're just for kids, but they're for human beings in general. Charles, anything that there's a lot that we didn't hit. I could ask you questions on this book for many more hours, but is there anything that we've talked about that you didn't get to voice, something that you wanted to get in there? Any final thoughts on building trust?
I just want to actually go back and reiterate two points. One is that trust is not binary. It's not an on-off switch, that there are ways in which we can trust people and also not trust people at the same time. And the second part of that is that trust takes intention. So intention to be trustworthy, intention to extend trust to others wisely, as well as being trustworthy oneself. And then the behaviors, actually paying attention to the behaviors that go along with that and build it. one of the most important behaviors is conversations, having the conversations when, not just when things go south, but beforehand. So that you have a shared understanding of what trust looks like around here. Not just, oh, hey, that's our value is trust, but how do you operationalize that? What does it look and sound like?
Yeah. I think it's so important to have those conversations, and they often don't get had. I would encourage anybody listening to this to go out and buy the book, The Thin Book of Trust. I was at a sort of salon style dinner where we were talking about learning and development and teamwork and that kind of a thing. And I mentioned that you were going to be coming on the show, and two people at the table had said that they had read the book and raved about it. For me, it was really helpful to have some conversations. I was able to put it into practice right away. So we've got several plugs for the book since you and I agreed to do this conversation. So just encourage anybody out there. I was going to say who's a leader, but really this is just a human to human thing. So encourage anyone out there to go get it. It's a very quick read and can be very impactful. So Charles, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for writing the book. Thank you for coming here and for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you very much, O'Brien. I really appreciate it. It's a wonderful conversation.
Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.